Welcome to the Geography of Crime, a podcast by Cap Index hosted by Dr. Grant Drawvey, Vice President of Geospatial Crime Solutions. Crime doesn't happen in a vacuum. Place matters. And in each episode of this podcast, we'll explore how geography shapes crime risk across industries. With expert insights from criminologists, security professionals, and business leaders, we'll break down crime trends, analyze real-world data, and explore what drives risk in different places. Now, let's dive into today's episode.
Catch up with some of the policing angles too as well.
Yeah.
Now with that, and you brought up an interesting topic, good old AI. How do you see that fitting in, be it crime analysis, the policing area altogether? Because it's going to be the hot topic. It's going to continue to be.
Yeah.
Where do you see that sitting?
Well, it's AI and it's big data, right? There's some books been written about big data. And we think about that. We tend to, we have 100 years or since 1920 looked at, well, that's 100 years of UCR crime, right? The 8 index crimes. And now we have the NIBRS crimes, which expanded that. The truth of the matter is most of our bigger crime problems are cyber crime and internet crimes and that kind of stuff. And we really don't have experts in policing to deal with that. It's really street crime. They're stuck in 1960 or 1990, if you will. But AI will provide not only the ability to look at, we've got a ton of data for 911 call for service data, CAD data. And we can, and again, at Tempe, I had 10 years worth of data. I think every agency should have at least 5 years of data at their fingertips. You cannot do trend analysis, even month to month. And I've mapped it out or graphed it out by the day. The first time I did that in Tempe, we looked at a year's worth of data, and we saw this spike on a Tuesday in like March, and I'm like, what the heck is that? And we got on a regular map, and at first I didn't find anything. It was St. Patty's Day, and it had to do with drinking and partying and having a good time in Denver, right? And I was like, I never even thought about that being a high crime for call for service day. I think of 4th of July, that kind of deal. But and it just struck me, and I never would have even looked at that had I not graphed that out day by day, right, on a bigger scale. But to have 10 years worth of data. And there's challenges to that, right? Databases change, we change the structure, but there's no reason we can't add new data fields or new relational data tables and grow it over time, but keep the fundamental. We need to know when and where victim. Think of the crime triangle. What are we collecting around offender data, victim data, and place data, right? And we're getting better at it. I mean, there's no question. But to me, I'm not an anti-AI guy. I'm still learning it, like we all are. I think it's a little scary. I don't want a computer making all my decisions, but as a tool, I'm sorry, it's grammar check and spell check in Microsoft Word now for 5 years. That's AI. It's going out and looking in a dictionary on my behalf and looking at grammatical problems and helping me build a better product. So if I use AI to identify patterns that I can't see through either my own eyes or through my own ability to, in my own brain to run an algorithm or do a hypothesis, right? That's one hypothesis at a time, go test it. The computer, with its infinite power, can look at tens of thousands of millions of records, terabytes of information. And not only can we do it for crime data, but now we can look at ethnicity and race and bus stops and risk train modeling and things like that are really going to help us understand the dynamics and calculate risk or victimization probabilities and things like that. And if we really care about the next victimization and not the next arrest, then we're going to do things. We're going to change the environment. We're going to educate potential victims. If you have a serial rapist in Central Park, then you need to put out information. You need to not let people go in there after 10 o'clock. Do a temporary curfew until you catch the guy. With cameras, so whether that's the Ring doorbell or things like Flock, that license plate readers, drones that we're going to be able to pick up almost real-time crime centers, looking at wherever we want to take that device, and we're going to collect intelligence. We're going to collect information, vehicles, some of the AI that's going to be able to look at cameras that are coming on and off the freeway. We know we had a crime of a stolen car that came in. It's a white pickup truck. Well, it'll go out and grab all the white pickup trucks, and maybe you'll get lucky and freeze it and get a license plate or a partial plate, and that's an investigative lead. And we turn that around in 24 hours or less, or 72 hours, and not assign it to a detective who might get to it as a stolen
Best of
vehicle
luck.
report. They're stealing those cars and committing, in some cases, violent crimes, right? And how do we connect those dots? What's the relationship to some of those kinds of things? Who are the prolific offenders? What is the more broad, what's their activity look like? And I'm not talking about offender profiles, not geographic or racial profiling, although I'm a big fan of geographic profiling in terms of where that crime is, the spatial crime, but it's not racial profiling. I'm talking about understanding the characteristics of an offender. Are they a marauder? Are they a commuter? Are they why do they target certain things? What do, in their mind, the psychology going on? Who's a vulnerable offender? 80% of these violent offenders are in prison. We could go talk to them. You want to talk about qualitative research? Why aren't we sitting down and saying, why did you pick those 3 locations? How can we harden target? What can we do to make that a better hardened target? How can we harden that target? I guess is the way to say that.
And there used to be that show that used to hire a prior burglar, and they would have him burgle their house. Mm-hmm. And that always to me was interesting, of like, you're now seeing like the method to the madness behind it. You're picking their brain of why they targeted this, where they went, how they got in. It is the method to it all, and it's tough. Yeah. And I think, like, to your point, AI is going to be in an interesting position to help comb through the sheer volume of, be it connectors they have access to data for, or just internal data. Truly, for a decent sized city, calls for service plus crime data grows hellaciously very quickly. Yeah. So to have that ability to integrate some of that to just assist you along the way will go a long way for, be it crime prevention or even analysis, or trying to think of where you need to allocate resources. Yeah.
Connect the dots on what are the best strategies that are out there. Again, we got to build this knowledge base, and that was what Problem Line Policing is to build those pop guides and more information. What George Mason University is doing with the matrix and scoring and looking at what these are effective, this isn't effective, and again, writing these more guides or creating a database around that so we can share. This worked in Portland. It didn't work in Miami. This worked in Phoenix, but it didn't work in a small rural community. And then let IA, kind of look at that and connect the dots on. These are effective strategies that work in 60% of the jurisdictions in the country. We're not even collecting it, and so IA can't look at it. If it, garbage in, garbage out, if the data is not there, or agencies aren't doing that, all they're doing is doing reactive policing still. And that's what's amazing in 2025. And again, we got 17,000 police departments. There's a structural problem maybe with some of that. And we'll talk about that maybe. But, they're still doing old-fashioned policing like it was done, in 1930. They get in a car, drive around, the phone rings. There's a book called Beyond 911 by Malcolm Sparrow and a couple of the people that talked about the invention of the automobile, the patrol car, the two-way radio, and the 911 system. We became slaves to our own invention, right? And that's a good book to read if you're trying to figure out how technology can go wrong, or you create a model that we can't get out of somehow, right? We've created 311 systems so that at least people aren't calling, non-emergency calls to the police department, like, what time does the parade start? But again, that's calls for service. That's a great data set. There's comments in the CAD comments, the dispatcher comments. There's repeat locations. There's premise history. There's hazards. There's, how powerful is that, particularly to an officer who's going to respond? Does this person have guns? Does this person threaten the police? Or is there drugs? Is there chemicals on this site? And we do that a little bit, but maybe it's kind of behind the scenes, and it ought to be up front in terms of.
Oh, sure.
So, I mentioned the need for a structural change, and I'll give you an example. I lived in Summit County, Colorado. It's where Breckenridge is kind of the biggest city. It's a ski. There's a couple ski resorts there, and then there's like 3 or 4 small towns. what's the lake up there? Lake Dillon, the city of Dillon, Frisco, Breckenridge, and one more town that's right there. I lived above it. And it has a sheriff's department and 4 police departments. Total population, 11,000 people. They need to consolidate their police department under the sheriff or under some county police department. Doesn't have to be a sheriff's department. It could be. I don't care. But that ought to have one chief, one executive, and share their resources. And they, none of them separately can hire a crime analyst. But collectively, they all could pay for a quarter or 20% of a good analyst, or affiliate themselves with a researcher or a community college or a professor, and do this kind of thing. And that's just one example. And that's where 17,000 police departments across the country, the 90-some% have less than 15 officers, right?
Oh, and you hit a couple points and a few things there of like on the what work side of like the implementation evaluation, like everything needs a bit tailoring based on the city. And I think you brought up an interesting hurdle of some agencies are still a bit reactive. And it reminds me of some of the books that I've read on what happens in urban areas takes almost decades to fall back to more your rural areas. Yeah. So like, is it going to be similar like that for policing where it's kind of pulling them up over decades to get to the current status? And then it comes to what are some of those headaches or obstacles in the next 10 to 20 years within crime analysis? And I've seen this similar to like your Summit County example of even around me in Northwest Arkansas, we have second largest city in Arkansas. We have a good chunk of the population up here now. No crime analysts. I think they just hired one down in Fort Smith, which is still an hour south. But it is like there's multiple police agencies, but they don't see the crime analysis. So it's still very reactive. And it's still perplexing to me that they're that reliant on internal decisions without really assessing their data other than, I mean, look at the reports. It's your numbers. It's the same kind of thing. How many crimes we had this week? Where's the percent change? And they leave it at that. Where do you see some of those in the next 10 years for crime analysis working kind of this with policing?
Well, one of the problems is particularly small. And I'll give a little shout out to the Department of Justice and BJS. They're doing more support to regional and rural communities and technology and that's needed. But the other problem with the smaller of those agencies and even sheriff's departments is they live in this echo chamber, right? And they come up through their careers and the same mindset. It's what I did 30 years ago. If it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. And that has to be broken down a little bit. I remember when I was at CMAP, I went up to, and I won't name the city, but it was up in Montana, and we did a presentation. And I believe the chief of police or the sheriff kind of looked at me, and you can't make this up. He says, "I don't need any stinking mapping. I know where all the crime is. It's a small community." And I go, "But you don't know what it looks like for 5 years or 10 years." And I said, and I found myself arguing with him. And I'm not even a salesman. I'm not selling software. I'm here to help if you want it. And I caught myself, and I says, "You know what? I'm not here to sell anything. This is an idea. If you think it's valuable, then we'll help you with it. If you don't think it has any utility, I'll get back on the plane and go home. I mean, fine." But it's places like that are, these are, and they're growing communities. I mean, you look at, continued little pockets of towns, 30,000, 40,000 people. And so some of that is also the nature of policing. It's still a blue collar profession. Right? You don't have to have a degree. Some of the more medium-sized and larger agencies, you have to get at least an associate's degree to get promoted to sergeant or lieutenant. And I think we're doing better on that in terms of pragmatics and some of the criminal, what do they call it at George Mason University, translational criminology.
Yes.
And that's taking academic writings that nobody wants to read except the peer reviewers in your own little...
And that's it.
Right? Five of us are doing something unique. We have a niche. And when I publish an article so I can get my tenure, you read it, and then I read yours. And you talk about an echo chamber. That's about as kind of an echo chamber as you can get. So the ability to take some of that has application, right? That these are theories that could be applied. I just have to use common sense words, put it into a construct or a protocol that hotspot policing. That's not that complicated. And then cops say, well, yeah, I know those are hotspots. Or the average cop will say, yeah, well, it's been a problem for 20 years. Well, it's been a problem for 20 years. Why aren't the hell we doing something about that?
That
And
statement
it may not be
bothers me
stuff
so
the police
much.
can
Yes.
do.
Mm-hmm.
It might need to be education or income or job training or drug treatment, or that the cops know that it's the problem area, but the rest of your community and social services, that's what community policing would be, is those collaborations to make a difference, to help people, be contributing members of society. I mean, that's how simple it is for me. It's not easy. It's easier said than done because of funding and taxes and all those things. And I don't want to get political on here, but at the end of the day, at least we can have some common sense about what that might look like, right? And so I think as we grow in the internet and information and regional associations and building these partnerships, medium, smaller communities now have access to that. I don't have to fly to LA to get training. It's, I don't have that budget. You can use Excel, right? I mean, but I remember starting Steve Gottlieb. It was a paper matrix, right? And I used Lotus 1, 2, 3. Not very sophisticated in 1990, but I could I could sort my key factors, MO factors, and looked at those things. I did Map Info 1.0. I had 3 symbols, a triangle, a circle, and a square, and I had 8 colors, right? My colleague at the University of Denver, who's the director of the GIS program, said, just because we have 3.1 million colors doesn't give you license to use every one of them.
Fair enough.
I have another friend in New York who says, if you put, and I agree with her, you put more than 30 points on a map, she calls it a map vomit, that it's a kaleidoscope. You can't make any sense. It ought to start with a choropleth map, or the tool now in ArcGIS has that cluster tool that as you zoom in, it breaks hotspots into micro hotspots, right? And so we can, and almost interactively, right? So if you got 5 hotspots in your jurisdiction, you can zoom in on those, or you can start with a choropleth map and then zoom in and do, instead of looking at a beat, you break it up into census blocks or census tracts, and then zoom in. And once you get into the cluster of hotspots, then you can kind of start to look at the detail, right? And then overlay. What else is in here? Is there a bar in this location? Is there a pawn shop in this location? Is there public housing in this location? And that's how we make sense out of it, right? And there's some really just basic fundamental things I think we can do. But it's going to take the will to change. You're seeing it. I'm impressed when I had the opportunity to meet new chiefs at different venues, and we're seeing more and more chiefs come forward and either want to do it. We did that with CMAP. We got a lot of officers that came in. When we were at Denver, Chief I can't remember his last name. I want to say Whitcomb, but I don't think that's right. He wanted crime analysis, but he didn't have it in the budget to hire. So we did a police academy for sworn folks and took them through a crime mapping and analysis training program, a kind of an academy. And then they started doing it. And then part of my dissertation, I interviewed Hickenlooper, who was the mayor at the time. He then went on to run for president, but he became the mayor. Now he's a U.S. senator, and he found the funds to hire like 8 crime analysts. And he institutionalized the city and county of Denver, and now they've got data portals. Incrementally, you just got to get after it, right? You start somewhere. We used Tiger Files back in the day, right? When I first started, right? And it had streets and railroad tracks and little blue polygons for lakes and ponds. You could do census data. And actually census data was better back then than it is today. They kind of muddied the water so bad you can't even hardly use it. And there's certain things they don't report, except for at such a broad level, you can't break it down in a micro. But I could take a census block in a beat, and there's usually 20 or 200 census if you get down to the block level, and I can break up the hotspots into those smaller hotspots and do a micro analysis of each one. I can go out and drive around and look. I can do the little street view in Google Maps and walk around every block, right? I mean, it's amazing. Yes. Without leaving my desk, I could get a pretty good idea of what's there. And what you're talking about, broken windows, it picks up trash and broken cars if you do it right. It's pretty amazing.
that was probably one of the cooler, and what Nate Connolly and Eric Pisa and that group did a couple papers on that Google Street View, the systematic social observation. I love that kind of, like, I thought that was a nice use of Google Street View that I hadn't thought of. And they kind of did a few papers on it that I thought were, and I had students kind of mess around with that too. A nice tool, because you can't always go to that place that you're studying, but at least Google gives you that ability to kind of drop your person in it. Or if you're in Google Earth, create a tour of some of that, which kind of brings that context to what's going on in that area. Which brings me to, you're back at the university now.
Look for the conclusion of Grant's interview with Noah Fritz, where we will learn about the importance of applied education, structured internships, and better understanding of crime data within law enforcement and media. Be sure to subscribe to Cap Index's YouTube page and look for Geography of Crime on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for tuning in, because when it comes to crime, place always matters.